back to another episode of the Phoenix Founders Podcast. I'm excited to have Trevor Larson of Nectar HR with me today. Trevor, how you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
Good. We're proud investors in Nectar. Phoenix Ventures is a proud investor. You've built an incredible company. We're going to talk about that. But start by telling us what Nectar is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Greg. So Nectar is an employee recognition and communications platform. So we help companies really build culture by giving them the tools they need to drive engagement and retention across their workforce.
I love it. Engagement and retention. These are nonstop topics, I think, for executive teams, for companies of all sizes.
All sizes in any location, right?
Yeah, any industry. I always want to start with this question before we jump into learning more about Nectar and talking about the founder journey here. I always want to know, was there anything in your upbringing that would have given any indication that you were entrepreneurial or would start a company at some point?
Actually, yes. Like if you ask my family members or people in the community, if you were to like fast forward the film a couple decades, like I think a lot of them could have guessed that. At the time, I didn't really feel that way. I just, from a young age, liked money and liked figuring out how to make it. So I had tons of side hustles growing up, from like being in Arizona, the citrus trees that have to get painted, right? A lot of people from outside of Arizona don't understand what that is or how it works.
Got to keep those tree trunks safe from the sun.
That's exactly right. And so me and my little brother would get like the little red wagon, and we would go door to door because there's some neighborhoods nearby that, people in their backyard would have 20, 30 of these trees. And so we'd go to Home Depot and buy like the special paint for the trees and charge like $12 a tree and just be all day like painting the trees. I also had like pretty early eBay days in like early maybe 2000, 2001. I would buy stuff in bulk from China. You haven't heard some of this.
I haven't heard this. No, I haven't heard this.
I'd buy stuff in bulk from China, and then I'd go sell it on eBay and get kind of the arbitrage on that.
Making spread.
Making spread, exactly. I would also buy stuff in bulk and then go sell it at school. So I remember one time I bought all these sticky hands. This was like 6th or 7th grade. And I was selling them at school, and there was this one girl that was like giving me a hard time about it. And so I went and snatched her paper from far away. And as soon as class was over, I had a whole line of people buying them.
Product demo, like a real-time product demo. People wanted to buy the product.
Exactly. Did duct tape wallets. So I had like this kind of formula I created for duct tape wallets and would sell those. All kinds of stuff growing up. So.
I didn't know those stories. I want to ask you a question. Like, I want to get into the Nectar journey in just a minute, but just want to, because you're talking about this right now. I was talking to Clayton Mask, founder of Infusionsoft, later Keep, recently, and he said, one thing I think every founder needs to be better at is selling. And the examples you just mentioned are like you were selling something and you were demonstrating value and selling something. Is that something you've observed in your founder journey? Like, how important is the skill of selling, either for technical founders or non-technical founders?
Selling is everything. I mean, as a CEO, I think the higher up in an org you go, the better you have to be at sales, or at least have those skills, because whether I'm selling product today or not, you're selling the vision, you're selling to recruits, you're selling to current employees, like the vision of the company. Everything you're doing has something to do with sales, and it's like agnostic of just having the product and being able to sell that, I think. Yeah, in the early days, that's super important. And it still is over time, and I'll try to help out on some larger deals here and there. But just the sales skill like lives on across everything you do as a CEO or as a founder.
Even now, as you have over 100 employees, do you have, are you still involved in, and you have a big sales team, are you still involved in some larger enterprise sales?
A little bit. It depends. I feel like since we brought in our revenue leader, our CRO, like earlier on this last year, he's really taken that over, and he's way better at it than me, honestly.
Awesome.
But wherever I can be helpful, I'm definitely there.
I love the insight on selling and the multiple dimensions. You mentioned you got to sell employees of the vision. You got to track top talent, track outside talent. I don't think you mentioned it, but capital raising is a selling effort
that was one
as well too. So I totally agree with you.
And then even like changes, right? Like the org is constantly changing as you grow, and you sometimes have to make org changes or do things a little bit differently that requires people to be bought in. And in order for them to be bought in, you have to like really sell them on why it's important, right?
Yeah. Explain, address concerns, overcome objections.
Exactly.
You know, and
all of that.
And get it all done. I love it. So great examples of early entrepreneurship. You went to college. Yep. You started Nectar while you were in college. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, what was it? Like, what was it about Nectar? And I know that like the early days of Nectar went through multiple iterations.
Yeah.
I'm always interested in the pivots, the mistakes, the lessons learned. So give us a little bit of color commentary on why you started it, what you learned, how it evolved over time.
So I was HO in Phoenix, born and raised.
I love it.
Was a Sun Devil for a year.
Forks up.
And things are going well right now, by the way. So I did that. I served a 2-year mission for my church in Argentina, which was a phenomenal experience. After that, a lot of my friends were up in Utah. So I moved up there, went to Utah Valley University, where I was actually pre-dental. So I was a pre-dental student. The goal was to eventually be an orthodontist, biology major, kind of crazy. So I was doing that, all the organic chemistries and biology courses.
That sounds terrible.
Which, you know, it's funny. I actually loved it. I really loved it. At first, my very first chem test, I think I got a 57% on. And it was like that test where I think after that, a bunch of people dropped out of like the pre-dental, pre-med program because they're like, I'm not going to get through chemistry. And it was actually a defining moment for me because it was a fight or flight moment. It's like, do I bow out now or do I go super hard and just like become the best at this? And I remember having to make this choice of like, I can do this. I'm going to prove to myself I can do this. Ended up getting really good at chemistry, and I was one of the top performers in the class years to come. And I just fell in love with it because it was just problem solving. I was building this problem solving muscle over and over, which I've kind of reflected on, I think has really set me up in a weird way for startup life.
Oh, yeah.
Because all you are as a founder is just a problem solver. And it kind of helped me build the confidence of like, I can be really crappy and not good at something, but if I go really hard and like I decide to master my craft, then I can be good at anything, right? If I'm the hardest worker in the room. And so that set me up nicely, I think, in a weird way, to be a founder.
Yeah. Did you ever see The Martian with Matt Damon?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I do love Matt Damon though.
Okay. Well, you should watch this. He goes to Mars. I'm just going to ruin the whole movie for you.
All right, deal.
So he makes it back safely. I just ruined the whole movie for you. But he makes it back safely. And at the end, he's teaching a class about going to space and being an astronaut. And he has this line. He says, you just do the math. Like you solve a problem. If you solve another problem, you get to solve another problem. You just do the math. And you get to come back home to Earth if you solve all the problems. And so I do think, and I've used that example with founders, I do think that what you said, problem solving is critical. You didn't mention this, but that moment in chemistry also is like exhibits resilience. And I know in your part of your story that's going to come back, but deciding that I can do this, I can overcome, I'm all in, I'm going to prove to myself and everyone else I can do this. Like there's an aspect of resilience in that story that I think is fundamental to all successful founders.
100%. I agree. So going back to it, I was pre-dental, as I mentioned. When I moved up to Utah, I think I had $500 in my bank account. Rent alone was like $400 a month, so things were pretty dicey. I brought my 2001 Honda Civic all the way up with all my earthly possessions in it. And I started getting, trying to like interview for jobs. I didn't have a job yet. And the idea was to build a mobile car detailing business from scratch, just because I loved the hustle aspect of it, but I also loved the flexibility around school.
Yep.
It was pretty good money. And I didn't really know anyone up here outside of just like some college friends who would never pay for something like this. So that wasn't super helpful. So I went up to Pleasant Grove. This is up in Utah. And I'm like, people in Pleasant Grove I heard are really nice. I'm going to knock some doors. So I started knocking doors and I was like, look, I will wash your car for free if you'll just post a picture of me on Facebook and just like share the service basically, because I wanted to get some type of exposure. No one would take me up on it.
What?
Yeah. They thought there was some catch. I'm like, there's no catch at all. Like, seriously, just let me wash your car for free. No one would do it. And this was like, I moved up in May. Towards like July, I still couldn't get like any customers. And so I was interviewing at these call center jobs where a lot of my friends were. That seemed so soul sucking. I did not want to do that. And I also didn't want to fail. I wanted to figure it out. So I had a friend who, she worked at Vivint Smart Home, and Vivint was like the big employer, the up and comer in Utah, a couple of thousand employees, and
sales machine.
They had these meal cards where every 8 hours that you clocked, you'd get this like meal ticket that you could then use at like these food trucks that came on site. So she asked me to join her. She had an extra meal ticket. I go, and as I'm like ordering, I see they have like a bunch of business cards on this food truck. And it was a chiropractor, and it had the Vivint logo, and it was like, as a Vivint employee, you get 20% off your first adjustment or something like that. And that was a moment where I was like, wait a second, like what if I became the provider of mobile car detailing for Vivint?
Vivint employees.
Yeah, because they have some type of perk program. So I don't know if you've heard this story either all the way, but that the next day I go in to the chiropractor, get my back adjusted, even though I didn't have any back issues. And at the end, I was like, hey, I saw that you were part of like this Vivint perk program. Tell me about that. And so he told me like all the business he gets from it. And I'm like, who can I contact to like get involved? This is what I'm doing. And he's like, he like writes on a piece of paper, like, here's her name and email. Don't tell her I sent you, kind of thing. And so I cold emailed her, and within 45 minutes, she's like, this sounds amazing. Let's meet next week. And I'm like, all right, we're meeting next week. So I went to Vistaprint, ordered some shirts. These, it was called Fresh Finish. So I ordered some Fresh Finish shirts, showed up, and she's like, you got a work truck, you got water source? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. We're good to go. And she's like, okay, let's do it. That night I went to Shields and bought a generator that we put in the back of the 2001 Honda Civic, my work truck. And that thing just lived in the back of my Honda Civic with all the gas dripping. And, you know, years later, I could never get the gas out of it. But yeah, started at Vivint, and overnight they sent hundreds of employees my way. Like I was booked out for months. So it went from like all summer, almost having to just like close shop, couldn't get anything off the ground, to just having a ton booked. Then Qualtrics, who, as you're probably familiar, they share parking lots with Vivint.
Yeah.
So somehow they saw what I was doing or heard about it. They reached out. I started doing all of their employees' cars. And then
you started to build a team at this point. You have more than, was it still just you?
It's kind of just I'd flex with friends, right? Like anytime it was a super busy day, signed up, I'd just ask some buddies and pay them like $20 an hour to come help. And so there was like a group of like 5 or 6 guys that like at any time I could just kind of grab it as needed, flex up and flex down. It was mostly just me at the time. Worked my way into doing all of Ryan Smith's really cool cars, specifically his G-Wagon, which was really fun.
Nice. Ryan Smith, founder of Qualtrics, for those who don't know, and owner of the Utah Jazz, among other things.
Yeah, and at the time, I mean, he was maybe a 35-year-old founder. Qualtrics was 500 or 600 employees, so very much in like startup phase, but had a ton of good traction. I'd always try to like talk to him anytime he came out to get his keys or whatever. And there was a time where he was like, you're young, you're scrappy. Like, why aren't you on our sales floor? And I was like, is that a job offer? And so he connected me with their like head of SDRs or business development. And within a few weeks, I started my first like SaaS sales job at Qualtrics. So that was like that very first exposure to the B2B software world.
So 3 takeaways.
Yeah.
Try to get Ryan Smith in your corner. Number 2, try to sell to Vivint employees. And 3, don't sell to people in Pleasant Grove. That's the main.
Nice. Yes.
Is that the main takeaways?
I like it.
Okay, good. So what happened from there? So then how long did you spend at Qualtrics then in sales?
I was only there 7 or 8 months. I came on as an SDR. I had my best buddy, Andrew, who became a co-founder of Nectar. He was actually running the car detailing on the side and kind of helping scale that.
You guys went to high school together?
Grew up since we were 6 or 7 years old, actually. So good buddies, all grown up. And then, let's see. Yeah, 7 or 8 months at Qualtrics. The SDR role, as many of you know, you're basically setting appointments for sales. So it's just tons of cold calls and emails. It's like the worst job in the entire world. And no one would do it unless they were forced to. And it was like a gateway to an actual like sales role in the software world. So you kind of got to pay your dues. Like it's like a residence of sorts, mm-hmm. right? And so I did it for 7 or 8 months. I was still planning on dental school at the time, right? When I walked into Qualtrics the very first time, like my whole world changed. It was like you're seeing dogs running around, like there's unlimited snacks, there's shuffleboard.
Tons of
Everyone's
energy.
hitting the phone. Yeah, energy drinks. Everyone's hitting the phones. There was just this crazy like vibe. And the more I thought about it, I was like, man, this thing is so scalable. They have customers all over the world. You know, selling software is fun. There's the recurring piece. There's the like high gross margins. And so that was like the moment where I'm like, you know, I think I'm going to be doing B2B SaaS the rest of my life.
That seems a little more interesting than car detailing.
A little bit.
A little more scalable.
Yeah. Especially when, you know, I remember trying to detail cars. It was 16 degrees outside, icy. I'm freezing. The wax is freezing on the paint of the car. Miserable. And so software seemed like a way better situation. But I think ultimately I enjoyed my time there. It was really hard. But every cold call, I felt like I was building Ryan's dream and his empire. And it was kind of like as soon as I was there and I was learning the skills, which really set me up for this journey, it was like, how quickly can I go build my own thing? And so I lasted about 7 months before spinning off to kind of start dabbling in my own software mm-hmm. business while still kind of finishing school. So
how'd that work out? Tell me about how what the company looked like when you first started it. And what year was this, by the way?
This was 2016 or so.
Okay.
Yeah, early 2016 was when I left Qualtrics, I think in January.
And what were you hoping the company would do? Like, was it, because I think you probably pivoted around even after you kind of got the software bug, and you wanted to take it to market. I'm guessing it changed a little bit over time.
Yeah, it changed a ton. So basically, my experience with car detailing is I'd worked with 2 to 3 dozen different companies in Utah where we would come on site, detail employees' cars. We were always working with the HR teams because they were in charge of the benefits and perks and employee experience. And that was how I was kind of exposed to that world. I started to see things from their perspective and what they were trying to do, which was to improve the employee experience and make sure employees felt happy and satisfied and engaged, all these different things. And I also saw working with Vivint and Qualtrics and some others, their employee perk program, usually they didn't have the resources to like have somebody full-time in charge of that. And so it would end up being this like intranet page where outside vendors like products and services would reach out to a Qualtrics or a Vivint wanting to offer a discount in exchange for like promotion, mm-hmm. which is what I was doing the car detailing. But typically the business didn't know what to do with that outside of just throw it on like a Google Doc somewhere. And what happened then is over time, a lot of those things were outdated or vendors would leave. But more importantly, employees like never knew about them, right? Like it wasn't typically part of onboarding like it should have been.
An employee perk has no value if there's not awareness, right?
Yeah, if there's not awareness and if it's hard to use and employees are confused on how to use it, like that's a big problem. So in fact, while I was at Qualtrics, I had a coworker. I remember she came in one day and was like, hey, I just found out that there was a discount for Provo Rec Center, like the gym. The problem is I found out a little late because I just signed up and I would have gotten 20% off my membership, but they wouldn't let her go back and change it.
No retro.
Yeah, but she found out that as a Qualtrics employee, she would have gotten that. And so that was a really interesting moment for me because I'm like, yeah, they have all of these things, but they're outdated, but people don't know where to find them, how to use them. So what if we built an app that we would then take what a company has, host it on an app to make it super visible for the employee, and then make it easy to redeem. And on top of it, we would go basically knock doors and go find more vendors, products and services that we could bring on to make it even more valuable to the employee. And then we'd charge the employer some type of software subscription to give their people access to it. So that was the original idea. It's a little fuzzy because it's been so long of like the path of everything that happened. But basically what I recall is me and my co-founder, Drew, he was pushing me to not go to dental school, which he still takes a lot of credit for, as he should. But we scrounged together, me, him, and then one other, Jackson. We scrounged together a few grand, and we were just trying to find some engineer anywhere to build a prototype. And so we found a couple of people on LinkedIn. I think we must have gone through 4 or 5 developers before we even had an MVP. Mm-hmm. Just, we'd always get the most junior cheap people that like couldn't actually bring it to life. But there was a competition at Utah Valley University, a startup competition. And so we decided like, hey, let's enter this thing. And the winner gets like $4,000 or something like that, and a little bit of clout. So we entered that, and we had just like a lightweight kind of MVP.
This is still 2016, 2017?
2017 probably at this point. Yeah. We were all still full-time school and whatnot. And we ended up going in the competition, and we won the whole thing, which I remember that was like the best day of my life at the time. And it was crazy, and it felt like we were on top of the world. And we got one of those big checks, but it was really $4,000,
That's awesome.
It was cool. It was I think ultimately it was the validation that was huge. We went on to the statewide competition and got like 3rd or 4th place there. But what's interesting is our very first customer came from this, which my mom, being the great supportive mother that she is, she was like kind of bragging about it at the office. And she worked at a company called Phoenix Logistics here. They do like aerospace manufacturing. And her CEO like overheard the conversation, was like asking more questions about it. And he's like, wait, this seems really cool. Can we fly him out to like come give me a demo? I want to see it. So they flew me out, and I'm literally in like this conference room with her CEO, my mom next to me. And I'm like pitching the CEO on this whole perk app. And anyways, he's like, how much does it cost? And I'm like, $4 per employee per month. He's like, that's it, done. And
I meant 40.
Yeah, exactly. I know. That's always, anytime it's that quick, it's like, man, I left some on the table, right?
It's okay to leave some on the table.
Especially early on. We just had to get somebody. Yep. And what we didn't have is all the perks locally here in Arizona. So we actually like flew down and like went to all these local restaurants and canvassed them to try to build it out. But they were literally our first customer.
That's awesome.
Crazy. Yeah.
So did the product work, by the way, when you got them live? Were they able to use the product, and were they happy with it? Or like, there's always so much learning that goes on when you get your first customer. So that's what I'm going for is what did you learn from that first customer, and what worked and what didn't?
There was this, what we called the white screen of death, that would always pop up where the screen would just go blank every now and again. I couldn't figure out why. So I think of that.
You think that was in hindsight, was that an architectural issue? Was it a product like design issue? Like what was the?
Probably architectural, like on the codes on the back end somewhere. And then we didn't have a ton of perks kind of in the area around here, but they stuck with us for a few years. Yeah, they stuck with us past my mom working there for a little bit, I think, before they ended up churning. We had UVU was like our second customer, and then City of Orem. And UVU was like 5,000 employees. So I remember the day that they launched for the first time. Mm-hmm. Like every time we'd reload, we sent out the launch email. We had like 90 users on the whole product, like 90 users, right? And then UVU launches, and every time I'd refresh the page, it was like another 300. It was like 300. We're just freaking out. It was crazy. And they ended up having like 4,000 users on it.
That's amazing.
Wild.
Yeah.
I just remember, the euphoric feeling of that,
That is so fun. I remember something similar in my own experience, but seeing usage go up and like hey, this thing's actually working is pretty good feeling when you've been working on something for years. So this is like 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
When did the business really start to work and take off? Because I think you raised a little bit of money in those early years, right? A little bit of outside kind of angel capital, maybe angel 2019, capital. 2020 time frame.
Yeah, 2018 I think was our first angel check, and it stemmed from the UVU story. So we won that competition, and before the statewide one, the professor in charge of like this business lecture series that I was in, he wanted us to come and practice in front of the group, like of 300 peers, before they had the CEO for the lecture series show up to address us. And so we took him up on that. As we're pitching, the CEO came early. His name was Mark Newman, and he had built HireVue. So he was at 20 years old in college, started HireVue, ultimately had like a $600+ million exit. But this was while he was still in the middle of building.
Kind of broadly speaking in the HR tech space, so kind of adjacent to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yep. Very cool.
So it happened to be him that day, and he saw like the tail end of our presentation. He came running down. He's like, guys, this is so cool. I started an HR tech company when I was your age in college, and I'm still building it. And he ended up speaking. We swapped information, and then he just completely ghosted me. And he ghosted me, and I was like, man, that would have been so cool to like have him as a mentor. And then I remember like 4 months later, maybe in the summer, on a Sunday night, I get an email from him randomly. He's like, I'm so sorry for ghosting you. I still want to talk. I owe you breakfast. Let's go. And so we grabbed breakfast, started hanging out more. He ended up writing us our first angel check, which then allowed us to go get our like original founding engineer. Mm-hmm. It was actually like a legit engineer. And the guy in like 24 hours, like rebuilt our entire app basically. And we're like, this is the guy. But we were able to like, we
really start to scale.
Yeah. We weren't paying ourselves anything, right? This was no income for a couple of years. And, but we were able to afford him to some extent to go build it out and start scaling the thing. So, yeah.
That's so great. How did the product change in those early years to when you started getting customer feedback? How do you know? I always wonder, how do founders know? And I've had my own experiences, but it seems like everybody's got to learn what to say yes to customers and what to kind of put in the parking lot and not work on. Were there some recurring themes, things that kept coming up from customers that drove your subsequent development?
Yeah, I think with the perks, we call it Perk Now. We did that for 2 or 3 years, right? Ultimately for us, what happened is we'd get high usage across our user base, and then renewal would come up and our customers would churn. And I remember Entrada, which is a pretty good-sized Utah tech company, they had 96% utilization. And so we're like, oh, this one's in the bag on renewal. And they churned. And it's like, all of your employees are using this. This is crazy. And that one for me was like the last straw, or kind of the last dagger. It was so painful. It's like, man, we can build a product that end users love and still
doesn't retain.
Still doesn't retain. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
That was the moment where I'm like, okay, this will fail if we continue on this path. And so what can we do that actually adds value to the business? And so as we kind of did our own research, asked customers, ultimately we felt this gravitational pull towards the employee recognition and kind of engagement space. And so in, early 2020, we had like a burn the boats moment where it was like, okay, we are now Nectar, and we rebuilt a brand new product that had nothing to do with employee perks and discounts. And essentially, like, out of the ashes of this failed college startup software experience was born Nectar. And so, yeah, it was a big pivot. It was scary. We knew that death was eventually going to happen if we kind of stayed on the same tracks. And that's one of the bigger lessons in the startup world is like, you can't just yes, you got to grind, and the best startups are stay ups, but you can't just like stay up and survive. You have to constantly be iterating and throwing the spaghetti against the wall until you can find that product market fit.
When something's working really well, there tends not to be a pivot, or you can invest in R&D, I guess, and explore new things. If something's really not working well, like not well at all, you have no other choice. You're going to fail if it doesn't. But it sounds like this was one of those middle of the road. That's where I think pivoting is the hardest, where it's sort of working, like you're signing up Entrada, but then they churn. Like you were signing people up, they were using, but then they were churning like that. Doing a wholesale pivot when something's sort of working is actually really quite hard for a founder. It's hard. It's hard not to hang on to the past and hope there's going to be a better future. It's hard to dump the past in total and then rewrite the future. Is that what do you think about that?
Yeah, it was hard, but I think the writing was on the wall for us.
Okay.
And we did enough customer discovery and just research in the space that we felt really confident that at the time, specifically like small businesses were being underserved in this employee recognition space. And so we felt confident that we could build something that could serve those customers and then, work our way upstream from there.
Because some bigger players in this space probably don't serve that market at all, right? Haven't really at all.
Nor should they really,
yeah.
Right? But it's a perfect place for a small, scrappy startup with zero expectations to kind of get going.
So when the new Nectar gets out there, this is like 2020. Also, COVID comes on.
Yeah.
Was COVID good for you in some ways, like because people needed to do remote like recognition in a remote way, or was it bad, or like how did COVID affect you in kind of the 2020?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we launched early 2020, all this excitement around the new stuff. I think we had 7 employees at the time, myself, 2 co-founders, a couple engineers, and then another sales and marketing person. And the day the world shut down, the day that Rudy Gobert grabbed the microphone, and Disney shut down, and NBA, all that, I think it was March 12th, 2020, maybe the 11th.
Yeah.
What was scary is we had very little pipeline, but it was building. And on that afternoon, every company in our pipeline emailed us and said, we're pausing this indefinitely. That was freaky.
That's really scary.
I don't know how long this is going to last, what we're going to do. Ultimately, within a week or 2, we had to let go of 2 people and just get it down to 5 of us. And it was scary because, pipeline's frozen. It's like this, we don't know how long this is going to last. But what we decided in that moment is we can't control. There's a lot we can't control here. What we can control, what we know to be true, is this is probably happening to our competitors. And we can use this as an advantage because our product was still in its infancy and we had a list of sales inhibitors. And so it's while they're frozen, we might as well focus on product. Let's build. Yeah, this is a perfect time to build. We still have plenty of runway. So let's build that and let's figure out distribution. 2 of us 3 founders we call ourselves reformed SDRs. That's where we got our start. And so all we knew to do is cold call and email. And that historically hadn't been working great for us. And the idea of an inbound lead seemed impossible, but amazing at the same time. And so we're what can we do to figure out that piece? What if we can get inbound to work? So focused heavily on online reviews with G2 and Capterra. And we got lots of customers we didn't have a ton of customers, but we probably had a dozen to leave us reviews, and then we could run ads on that. And then we focused on the sales inhibitors product wise to catch up. And within a few months, we went from 0 inbounds ever to 20 or 25. And my co-founder Drew was the one doing all the sales. And that's when, we started closing deals.
Yeah.
That's when things really started to work. So
you also quickly, you had this social, credibility, or there was external validation, I think, with these references, or these people that would leave references on these review sites. But was there a new category created on these review sites? Or if I remember correctly, you kind of became number 1 in this category on G2, for example. And that really it was total social validation at that point. Yeah.
I'm so glad we invested early in that. And that was the first channel for inbound. I don't remember how long it took us to get top ratings and everything on G2. It was probably 18 months or so, but it was a perfect place to start. And to your point about COVID, it went from this total curse of pipeline frozen you're right, a lot of the inbounds started coming in because overnight these companies completely changed and had to go remote, and they didn't have the tooling to like drive culture remotely or to ship swag to people or any type of incentives. And so all of a sudden, like there was a big appetite. It kind of like shined the spotlight on our category of software that like HR now like almost forcibly needed that they didn't before. So it did end up being kind of a blessing in the long run.
Cool. All right. Well, the journey's been pretty incredible. We invested, I think, in 2022 or 2021.
It was the day my daughter was born is when we closed, which was May 3rd, 2022.
All right.
So, yeah.
It's nice. It's been really amazing 2.5 years, almost 3 years.
Yeah.
Growth has been phenomenal. I mean, I think what you read a lot about in venture-backed high-growth companies is the need to triple, double. You guys are a few into that. You're a triple at least, and then at least one double in, and maybe approaching your second double here too. But the growth has been phenomenal. If you kind of zoom out a little bit and think in the last few years, like what has been, you talked about the review sites and things like that, but are there other lessons for founders listening? I always want to distill this down to lessons for people that are building companies. Is there, like, what's driven the phenomenal growth, if you could narrow this down to one or two things that you guys have done right?
It's a really great question. I think ultimately it all boils down to the caliber of people that you have on the team and the talent density, right? I think that it seems obvious, but it's so overlooked. Like you could have, two startups in the exact same space, both with say 50 employees competing. And it's like who you have on the roster matters more than anything. Like, is this the New York Yankees or is this Mountain View High School, the Toros, right, on the team? And so when you build out these like models and forecasts, the people on it are a bunch of ones and zeros, but it's like who you actually recruit onto the team matters so much, right? Because people are force multipliers. So for me, that's been like the biggest lesson. I think if we've done anything right, it's been recruit really, really talented, self-motivated people that know what they're doing, and not just let them loose, but like set the direction, still be in the details. But yeah, giving them room to cook. And for me, yeah, that's been
I feel like I think that's such a good insight, but I also think one thing that founders may not appreciate that I know about you, I feel like you are super involved in the recruiting process.
Oh,
I think sometimes founders hear that and think, oh, I need to hire someone to go like hire people for me. So tell me a little bit about what your role is in recruiting top talent.
Yeah, I'm very involved with it because I think it's that important. We have what we call the Nectar flywheel, and it all starts with the caliber of people on the team and getting the right people on the bus. And so I've been involved in 95 out of the 100 plus people on the team, like 95%. In fact, yeah.
Some of that is sourcing, and then some of that's even like, are you even doing some of the initial outreach like to executives, or how do you?
I do a lot of the outreach to this day.
Yeah.
Like if at all hands, I said, raise your hand. If I cold DM'd you on LinkedIn, it'd probably be 40 to 50% of the company.
I had no idea that. I did that same thing in my own experience. And I do think that's a superpower that founders sometimes like delegate to other people that I think is a huge mistake. Is like, it's your vision. Yep. It's your company. It's your dream. Nobody's better at telling the story of what this company is going to become. And top talent needs to hear from the CEO, from the founder, what the future vision of the company is, for them to leave like something good that they already have to join this like startup. So I think you're super smart to do that. And I think that's a way overlooked skill that a lot of founders miss out on.
Hugely overlooked. In fact, like anecdotally, a lot of the people who have joined the team will mention that. They're like, the fact that you DM'd me and like wanted me to come in for an interview was like the reason I did. Like I was not looking at all. And I was kind of, I don't know, it's more of the title than anything in my mind, like a CEO reaching out to you. But yeah, that's a superpower that I think is very underutilized, to your point. And then from there, leverage just referrals internally, right? So people know other great people they've worked with in the past or friends. I'm involved in almost all the interviews. And yeah, it's kind of a combo of that. It's like internal referrals, because hiring's kind of a crapshoot. Like, people can interview well and maybe not be good, you know, and it's hard to get right all the time. But the way to like minimize the error there is, as a founder, you need to be super involved in the sourcing and in the interviewing, but also you need to get the team involved in helping recruit. And, you know, the best thing I hear from current employees, a couple actually come to mind where they like become the gatekeepers. Like, I'll ask them for referrals and I'll be like, hey, do you know this person? Like, I reached out to them. They're like, nope, we don't want them. They're not good enough for Nectar.
They're not Nectar. They're not Nectar quality.
Right yeah,
I love that.
That's great.
You know, I'm always fascinated when a company we've invested in or a company that we're close to hires talent that, this is going to sound bad, but the talent seems like they're actually too good for the company that we've invested in. Like, they're like a step ahead, and you're like, wow, if you can get that person, like, I don't know why that person's choosing to come work there, but it's always a good sign when truly top talent takes a step, like, I won't say back in their career, but they'll go to an earlier stage company. They take a salary cut. Maybe they could make way more somewhere else, but they just want to be part of this company. Have you had any experiences like that where you've attracted people that could make way more somewhere else? They're like, I mean, I think your chief revenue officer is an example of someone that's like this, but and that's also just a huge tailwind when you attack talent that even at the senior levels that really is like could be making more money somewhere else. But is that something you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the early days, you're trying to get like really scrappy generalists that maybe aren't super deep into their career, but you see the trajectory, like they're inflecting or about to inflect. And then the more you start scaling, you know, you come to a point where you have to build out a leadership team and an exec team. And that's when at least my take is, and my lived experience is like, I wanted people that had seen the film before, right? That I didn't have to really manage per se, but I could just kind of set the direction and the vision and then like partner with them and giving them the reins to like own a certain function. This has happened multiple times at Nectar. I think the two that I would call out are one, our CTO, Brian, who, you know, he was the SVP of engineering at Pluralsight.
Oh, wow.
For a decade, right, over their flagship product. And so for us to be able, little old us, you know, at the time only a few million in ARR, to go grab somebody like that was insane. I still think about it every day, being able to go get someone like Brian.
Why did he come, by the way? What was it about Nectar that made him interested?
You know, I think he had been in startups before. It'd been a long time, though. He'd been at Pluralsight for, as I mentioned, about a decade. And managing, you know, ultimately 150, 200 engineers that kind of rolled up to him. I think it got to the point where he missed being super involved in like actually building a product customers loved.
Yep.
And he was so stuck in like the managerial aspect.
It's more about managing than building.
Yep. He missed the building. And, you know, if you got to know Brian, you know, he's just a builder to his core.
Yeah.
And so he had this really unique skill set where he'd lived startup life. He even had his own like startup for a while in years past. And then he'd worked his way all the way up to the top. But he kind of missed the early days and being super involved and making a really, really big impact. And so it was amazing for us because you find somebody that's like seen all the film and it's like, okay, now like go do this part again, right? Yeah. And do it better than you've ever done it before. Yeah. So I think that part was super compelling. And then he'd also used some other similar products in the past to Nectar, and he felt the value. He was very bought in early on to like what we were
concept.
doing.
Yeah. Product concept.
Yep. So I think those things
that
and just like
example.
The potential were really exciting and attractive to him.
You said a couple of examples. I think you mentioned Brian, but you said you got a couple of examples.
Yeah. And then Craig coming in as our CRO, he was one of the early like Qualtrics sales reps, I think employee sub 100 in there, and was a sales leader there, had a really great run as a VP of sales at Podium, went a few other spots as well afterwards. But when we were like recruiting a VP of sales or CRO kind of persona, once again, we wanted somebody that'd seen this film before. And for sales, I think in my mind, at least, might be oversimplifying it, but to me, it's like this trifecta. To be a really great revenue leader, you have to have great leadership capabilities to be able to like really motivate and inspire people to do their best, and for them to feel that you actually care, but that you're going to push and challenge them. That's huge. Then you have like the art of sales and revenue perspective. Like, is this a leader that on my enterprise deal, I want 100 times out of 100 on the call because they're going to help me close it? And then you have the more science, like operational aspect of it. And you're never going to find like this perfect blend of all three. Most of the time, it's somebody that's very good at the science, but not so much the art, or vice versa, or just the leadership piece. And as we did our search and talked to a lot of folks, Craig was always pointed to us as like one of the top sales leaders in Utah.
He's good at all three of those.
Yeah, he really is great at all three of those, which is insane. And I've never seen someone with better like EQ. Like everyone just absolutely loves him. He just gets it. Amazing leader and knows what he's doing. And he's the guy you want on all your deals as well. And to this day, he's on multiple demos every single day trying to help us close deals. So, getting Craig on board has really been a huge part of our inflection over this last, 9+ months.
Yeah, just to connect a couple of thoughts and get your reaction here. I'm not sure you get either one of those people, Craig or Brian, if some third-party recruiter is reaching out to them, and like that level of talent wants to have like CEO and founder contact earlier. They probably don't even take the first call. Do you think that's true?
100%.
Yeah.
Yep. Very, very true. Yeah. I mean, when you're talking executive leadership team, if you're not the one pursuing them, reaching out to them, whining and dining them, like all the above, sending their wife crumble, that's like a common move we do that has paid dividends for sure. All the different things, there's just no shot. But even beyond that, I think just even like the frontline folks you want to be super involved with for a really long time.
You're the chief recruiting officer.
Exactly. That's, in my mind, I could be wrong. I haven't been a CEO forever. But I think if there's one thing you can't screw up, it's recruiting. You need to be the chief recruitment officer. Absolutely.
Preach. Love it. All right. We're going to wrap up here. And anything else about the growth has been phenomenal here. What's next for Nectar? If you would look in the future, as you guys continue to scale and make your run toward $100 million in annual recurring revenue in the coming years, what's the thing that's on your mind for the future?
I mean, for us, as we mentioned, I think earlier, we started in this employee recognition category or space, and our focus has been to become the mid-market, like the de facto mid-market leader for what we do. As we think about the market and the landscape and what the world needs, we feel very strongly that there's a new category to be created, which is becoming the culture platform or an operating system to help companies build strong cultures that ultimately drive the important business outcomes like employee engagement, keeping people longer with retention. And so, this last year we added a new product around communications. Mm-hmm. So now we have recognition rewards, communications. Soon we're adding more things around predictive analytics and, a feedback component to help better diagnose where your culture's at. So zooming out, it's becoming more of a platform to help drive culture where people are engaged and they want to stick around. And, I say this to the team every time I talk to them that it's still day one at Nectar. We're just getting started.
Love it. Anything else we should talk about before I go to my closing questions?
No, I think that's
we covered it.
Yeah,
all right.
Covered it.
I always want to end with my two standard closing questions. What's something you're most grateful for?
Ooh, that's a good one. There is so much to be grateful for. I think the first thing that comes to mind is an amazing support system. I think I've been so blessed on that front, between like an amazing wife who early days, no income, was patient with me, worked 3 or 4 jobs to keep us afloat. On top of that, parents, I think some people's parents, if they were to do what I've done, like wouldn't be super supportive or more concerned. Amazing parents on that front, down to like friends, great co-founders, but also mentors. I think I've been blessed with a half a dozen really great mentors who have seen the film and have been where I want to go, yourself included, Clayt included, and some others, Mark. And man, I feel like I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. So yeah, feel super grateful for that.
I love that. Great stuff. Last question.
Yeah.
If you're going to go eat tacos in Arizona, I'm secretly curating a list of the best tacos in Arizona. Where do you go eat tacos? I
can't really help you there because I've been gone for a decade, and it was before I went and got a bunch of tacos growing up. So I'm gonna dodge that a little bit and just say that the first place I go when I land in Arizona from Utah is Barro's. I go straight to Barro's Pizza. It's the best place ever.
We're not curating a list of pizza places. We are definitely cutting this out.
Yeah, I'm sure
of this episode. Like that's terrible.
I don't even have an answer. I'm a burrito
Barro's
guy.
is fine, but like it's out. That's a terrible answer. Hey, Trevor, I am so impressed with what you've built. You and the team have built at Nectar. So many great lessons for founders here. Congrats on all the success, and look forward to seeing what you do in the coming years. Oh, we didn't talk about one thing I might want to weave in here.
Let's try.
I forgot to ask you about the capital raising process. You got these remarkable investors in PeakSpan most recently. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be? I think you were talking to 10 or 15. We invested in 2022, and then you went out kind of a couple years later to raise another round, and you met the PeakSpan people. Tell us a little bit about how that came to be.
Yeah, for sure. So, we've always focused a lot on optionality. Like when we raised from you guys, it was very much we were operating as if we'd never raise again, right? So we wanted optionality of like, do we become profitable and grow that way? Do we raise another round?
High growth, but control your destiny.
Yeah, exactly. High growth, control your destiny. So, we kind of ran a process where I talked to a couple dozen investors. You try to narrow it down to like your ideal investor profile, who's going to write the right check size that may have a certain emphasis in HR tech or what you do. Ultimately met PeakSpan through Mark Newman, who I mentioned was our first angel check. He's good friends with Phil Durr, who started PeakSpan as one of the main partners there. So they courted us for, probably 6 months or so. And from the beginning, they stood out. And I remember telling you this, like, hey, PeakSpan's my favorite. I hope everything works out. And you're like, hey, don't get too excited about anyone just yet. But yeah, at the end of the day, they were the ones that we really enjoyed getting to know the whole time. We felt super aligned with from the beginning across a lot of fronts. And then we're able to partner with early on this year, which has been so great.
So two questions I want to ask you as a follow-up on this.
Yeah.
And this, one of is my opinion. I'd like you to validate or shoot it down. I personally think the most important reason to run a process isn't to push the price up, but to find the right partner. So the fact that you fell in love with PeakSpan, like that's a super successful process. I know you negotiate a little around the edges with them, but is that been your experience? Like you got to meet like 15 to 20, like top-notch investors, and you just started to build a relationship with them through the process. You kind of can't discover who they are without that. Was that your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like what you want more than anything is a great partner. Even if it's not the best price, it needs to be a competitive and a really good price, right? It can't be more than, call it 10%.
It's got to be in the range.
But running a process and creating an event out of the fundraising is what gets everyone to that point and make sure to that you're going to end up getting a price that's fair in the market and allowing you to pick the best partner at the same time, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to PeakSpan, and I don't think founders fully appreciate this, when someone is smart on a space and they love a space, like they will pursue the space. They do outbound, but they're also super knowledgeable. And then as founders, we see that and we're like, hey, these people know my industry better than I do. Like, I want them as my partner. And I don't think a lot of founders appreciate when you find the right investor, like it feels like a partner who like loves the problem as much as you do. And that's like magic. A Peaksbound was phenomenal at that. Like better than that. They're probably better than anybody I've seen at that in the HR tech space for sure.
They see something they like and they pursue it all the way, and they are super creative about how they do things. Just really high caliber people, super high energy. And, you always wonder, like, post funding, what's it gonna be like in the boardroom, or like, are they still gonna be helpful? Are they too busy like pursuing other deals and opportunities? But I've been just super impressed.
They're true partners.
Yeah, totally. So
I'm glad that they are your second favorite investor. I'm just kidding. They're amazing. Hey, Trevor, thanks again, and thanks for all the time. And I've learned a ton from watching you and the team execute at Nectar. And congrats on all the progress. And thanks most of all for being on the Phoenix Founders Podcast.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.